We've been talking to people as they walk out of Ukraine about the totally uncertain futures they face. They're joining a global refugee population that's trying to find safety, shelter, and dignity in places that still haven't figured out how to give it to them. That's part of the story behind Flee, an animated film produced in association with Vice Studios. It's about a real, anonymous man who got out of Afghanistan in the 90s, but his life in Denmark is haunted by that past. Let's take a look.
There's no need to worry. Just tell us what happened.
I was interviewed for hours. For many hours. I have to stick to the story the smuggler gave me. I'm crying. This damn story, it really hits me, even though it isn't true. I'm sobbing uncontrollably. I can't get myself to stop. And I'm surprised that I'm crying over something that isn't even real. As soon as I'm done, I take my notebook and write down everything I said, word for word, in diary. This is a story that I told everyone. Until now.
Flee has already made Oscar history with just its nominations. And the executive producer of the film, the award-winning actor Riz Ahmed, spoke with Vice founder Suroosh Alvi about why this story is central to what we're seeing play out across the world today.
It's very rare to get a film that is so timely and hits the zeitgeist with current events in such a profound way. But then on top of that, it's so rare to see a film that's so vulnerable and personal, on the part of the filmmakers and the people whose story it is. And then to cap it all off, I can't remember the last time I saw a film that was so innovative in its form. It really stretches the genre and pushes forward what a documentary can be. So that kind of triple whammy of so personal, so innovative, so relevant to what's going on in the world. It was a no-brainer for me. I just had to be involved any way possible.
I mean, it's kind of crazy. We did the work on this project. You got involved. It came out at Sundance, and then the U.S. pulls out of Afghanistan, and it was just the timing of it all was insane. And that's so fresh in our memory still. And then we're watching the tragedies unfold in the Ukraine right now, with literally millions of people fleeing for their lives. It kind of makes the Amin story and Flee even that much more relevant, I think.
I mean, it's a strange feeling in a way, because you don't want these kind of stories to be so relevant and so current. I wish this was a work of complete fiction. But of course, part of what makes it so powerful is that Amin is sharing a really personal story. He's not pontificating about the refugee crisis in any way. He's just talking about his own intimate lived experience that he'd never shared before. And it's only after 25 years of friendship with Jonas, the director, and 8 years of conversations with him that we're getting that. And it's kind of a lesson, I think, for me, just as a storyteller, that it's often the most personal stories that kind of hit a kind of universal nerve, When someone really speaks their deepest truth in a brave way, I feel that it kind of catches fire and people around the world connect to it. And of course, with what's happening in Ukraine right now, it just really underlines this idea that, anyone can be a refugee.
Was there anything in Amin's story that connected with you personally?
Well, I've certainly never been through anything like what Amin has. And yet there were echoes of his story in the stories that I had heard in my own family's history and past. This idea of people leaving home with nothing but the shirts on their back, leaving everything, leaving their friends and family behind, losing loved ones along the way, undertaking these life or death journeys. There were kind of ghosts of my own heritage in his story that I heard. And so I guess it's not so much that, for me, anyone can be a refugee or anyone can be a migrant, could be. It's that everyone is on some level.
In your conversations with him, did he share at all with you what it was like for him to see this next generation of young Afghans fleeing recently? Is that something that you were able to talk to him about?
You know, I actually wasn't able to talk to him in that way. But one thing I did talk to him about was how it felt to finally share his story. Because it's one thing taking the leap of sharing it with Jonas, it's another thing sharing it with the world, and for it to become so public. And from what I understand, it's been very cathartic, it's been very healing, but it's also been quite strange, you know, to have a kind of private sorrow shared in so publicly. I think sometimes, you know, and Amin's is a really extreme version of this, if we're not used to seeing our stories out there, we can be surprised when people connect with them. But what people connect with in stories is the honesty. Now, even if they haven't been through anything as similar. So I think it's been, you know, I don't want to speak for Amin, but I can't imagine that it's been a straightforward experience, you know. It's probably been a very complicated roller coaster to kind of share your wounds so publicly, and for it to be healing, but for it to also be a bit strange.
And do you think that had something to do with why it's animated and he remains anonymous through this film?
Yeah, I think the fact that it's animated works on so many different levels. Yes, it's really imaginative. It allows you to enter Amin's experience without having to cut to dramatizations or archive material. It kind of removes that dividing line between interviews and his memory, you know? So it works so well creatively, but also just on a kind of almost ethical level, it provides a real duty of care to Amin. You know, he's sharing this incredibly personal experience, and in a way you can tell that the film's grown out of a friendship, because here's Jonas trying to protect him. At a time when we're saying, no, who gets to tell whose story, I'm almost thinking it's more about how do you tell other people's stories, you know? Telling stories is always going to have some kind of imaginative leap, some kind of empathic leap, where you step into someone else's experience that's not your own. And that's the way it should be. It's a matter of how you do it, not who gets to do it.
As we watch these, you know, countries in Europe opening their doors and, you know, receiving all of these refugees from the Ukraine, which is great and they should do, it's hard not to notice the double standard that exists in regards to the refugees from Afghanistan, Syria, Africa, and what's happening right now. And I'm wondering if that's something you could speak to a little bit.
It's so complicated, isn't it? Because the main focus for me is like what's happening in Ukraine is horrific and it has to stop. And I'm so glad that these refugees are being granted refuge and are being, you know, there's hospitality being extended to them. These are innocent people, you know, families, women, children, so many people are dying. At the same time, you can't help but notice the double standards. You can't help but notice the very thinly veiled and in some cases not even hidden at all racism, or some of the commentary and some of the reactions that we've had in the West. You know, I think the more and more the world feels joined up into one global conversation, the less tenable that those kind of double standards are. To say that one set of refugees don't matter, that their suffering isn't as great just because of the color of their skin, I think, you know, the inconsistency is very glaring at this point. And I hope that it kind of shakes a lot of people into waking up and realizing the, you know, maybe in some cases unconscious, in other cases quite explicit biases that they're viewing the world through. Because it can't continue, you know. People are going to call it out.
I agree, like it can't continue, but it is continuing. You know, like there are Syrians literally dying in forests on the border of Poland right now.
You know, that double standard is crazy and it's galling, and it kind of opens up these uncomfortable questions. But I'd rather those questions get asked. I'd rather this stuff gets exposed. In my mind, that's the first step to tackling it head on. And of course, then you have the even crazier double standard of kind of white Europeans being encouraged to, or being hailed for going over to the Ukraine to fight as mercenaries and arming themselves. And of course, you have people of Muslim heritage having their, you know, passports revoked, being criminalized for going out to the Middle East to, you know, fight for people they feel a connection to. Now, I'm not saying either of those are right or wrong. I'm just saying that there's a bit of a glaring inconsistency there. And I'm glad the conversation's been opened up, to be honest.
So Long Goodbye, another film that is nominated for an Oscar. Congratulations.
Thanks.
No big deal. You know, it's a non-traditional portrayal of a South Asian community in the UK in the third act. The first part really feels like you cast your uncle to play your father, and it's like captures, I think, the way you grew up, maybe, in a way, what your house was like, and then you referred to it as an act of defiance, the violence at the end, the kind of horror of it all. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, the way I see it, even if you're telling a really disturbing story, even if you're creating a story about your pain or your nightmare scenario, just like The Long Goodbye is, the act of telling that story is an act of hope. It is an act of defiance, to just speak your experience, to say this deserves to be heard, for it to be thrown up there like a banner for other people who feel that way to share in it, you know, for other people to step into that experience. It is an act of defiance. It is an act of hope. And I would say, you know, the reason why the film takes that kind of final left turn, and it's a film with many left turns, but it takes that final section of, you know, that defiant kind of raptor camera, is because, yeah, we won't be defeated. You know what I mean? You know, the people that don't want us here, you know, are not going to win, because we ain't going anywhere. So that's really what the film is in a nutshell.
I feel like, you know, this kind of, your journey as a third culture kid really is, you know, in both The Long Goodbye and in Mogul Mowgli. And can you speak a little bit about your experience of having lived in London, having lived in New York, being South Asian, Pakistani background? Like, what has it been like for you to try and find your place? Because the feelings of, the themes of marginalization, alienation, and not knowing, you know, who we are and where we're supposed to live are powerful themes in these films.
Yeah, you're right that some of my work touches on this theme of searching for an identity or searching for belonging or a sense of home. And as much as, you know, the Long Goodbye album or short film or Mogul Mowgli, or even, you know, Flea as a story kind of explores some of the pain and the confusion of that, these projects are also a celebration of that journey. You know, I wouldn't swap out my experience for anyone else's. In so many ways, I feel grateful to have been fed that confusion and those contradictions, because then I'm forced to decide on who I am for myself. You know, it can be so easy to sleepwalk into an idea of who you are just because there's nothing else in your experiences that challenges that inherited idea of who you are. But actually, if, you know, day to day, hour to hour, the world is expecting you to be contradictory versions of yourself, then at some point, yes, it's a great asset to learn how to code switch as a chameleon and as an adolescent, as a young adult. But at some point as a man, you're forced to synthesize those parts of yourself and decide who you really are. I kind of think, you know, to the extent that it is a struggle, it's a beautiful struggle.
These three projects are, you know, have some pretty heavy themes. It's powerful shit. And for our next project that I hope we can collaborate on, let's find that absurd comedy.
Let's do it. But you know, it's funny you should say that, because, you know, someone came up to me after watching Long Goodbye and said, you know, that film really made me cry. And I was like, wow, was it hard hitting? He said, nah, I was crying at happiness of just seeing an Asian family hanging out and just cracking jokes in that first half of it. And you gotta have the light with the shade. I mean, Flea has got one of the most uplifting scenes I've seen in recent cinema history. I don't want to spoil it for people, but you've got to have that joy, you know what I mean? Just even getting through the pain is joyous. And similarly, when I think of, you know, Amin, and I think of the story that he's shared with the world, I hope on some level, despite all that pain and perhaps the confusion of keeping the secret and now sharing it, that he feels some joy, you know, because I've certainly felt that way having watched his story.
I mean, from everything I've heard and from that interview that you did with him, it seems like it has, you know, had that cathartic release for him, and he's also experiencing some joy. And I laughed and I cried during Flea.
You got to have that full range of experience. I hear what you're saying, man. It's like trying to depict the experiences of, in some ways, yes, there's a danger of not talking about some of the challenges that marginalized communities and POC face, but if you define people through their suffering, you know, that's just as troublesome, you know? We're so much more than that.
So I just got the 2-minute warning, Riz. What should we talk about for our final 2 minutes?
You know, bro, I'm just wanting to talk about that couch, man.
This couch?
That looks comfortable, bro. Yeah, it's velvet. Do you just feel like you just want to rub your, do you feel,
It's really good. And it's like good for my posture. It's my new shooting chair.
Really?
Yeah, I found it downstairs. Our CEO, Nancy, it's from her office. I kind of stole it from her during the pandemic. She wasn't coming in and I was shooting at the office. I was like, let's try the pink chair. I was like, it's been a revelation. Really good.
Nancy's never getting that chair back, is she?
No. Luckily she has two.
No.
Riz, thank you so much, bro. Really,
much love, man.
Much love.
Thank you for taking out the time, and
You too.
yeah, see you soon.